This is Robert Carroll, and welcome to the Nashville Media Technology Peer Group. The Nashville Technology Peer Group is a group of media technology professionals that share their knowledge and expertise on a peer-to-peer basis. And we try to meet either 4 to 5 times per year with different topics. And today's topic is going to be about music licensing and some of the issues and technology around music licensing. It'll be a nice introduction to music licensing. We also have a Slack channel. If you're not already part of our Slack channel, we encourage you to do that. I'm going to turn it over to Trevor and let Trevor tell us all he knows about demystifying music licensing. It's yours, Trevor.
Hello. So this is a topic we do know intimately well, and I have my good friend Mike Arnold here, who is the Director of Business Affairs on our music team at Soundstripe. So little bit of preamble here. Soundstripe is a music licensing company. So this is something we do in and out on a day-to-day basis. We're in a particular sect of music licensing that I'll talk a little bit about in here. But mostly this is meant to be a general primer to tell you a little bit about how music licensing works. It is inherently and historically a very complicated process. There's many reasons for that. But in order to shed some light on that, this presentation is aptly titled Music Licensing Demystified. So let me make sure we're sharing here. Mike, can you see my screen?
I can.
Beautiful. All right. So with music licensing, there's a number of ways that this comes up. Whether you're creating projects for, could be a podcast, could be a video. Again, there's a number of ways you can pair media together, but typically when music licensing is talked about, people think of sync licensing, which is synchronizing music to some other medium or form of content, whether it be other audio or video or whatever. But there are licensing needs that expand outside of that. This is going to primarily focus on like what we think of today, modern mediums, podcasting, video production, that kind of thing. But Mike will get into some specifics of kind of how the rights work and the different variants of licensing that there are. But to give sort of like an overview at the beginning, I thought it'd be helpful if we just take kind of a persona I made up. This is Vivian. She is going to be our, you can think of her as a video editor or a creative professional. For the sake of this, we'll say she's on a creative team in a marketing department for a company. And Vivian has been tasked with her company's newest project. This is going to be an ad, but that's about all they know for it. She's been tasked with like, hey, we have a certain amount of ad spend that we're looking to do. They have some revenue numbers they want to hit, but ultimately she's tasked with the creative. We want some ad that's engaging, potentially leads to a conversion if it's for an online business of some sort, that kind of thing. So as Vivian goes through this process, she decides to take a look at what's out there, right? There's tons of ads that have tons of different styles, right? You can have comedic ads. You can have some that kind of hit home. Maybe they're, a little more personal, give you a nostalgic feel. Then you have our classic like injury lawyer type commercials at the bottom. All of these have different vibes in general, right? Some of the more comedic ones might have what we would think of as like quirky music or sound beds, things like that. The Old Spice commercial, if you've ever seen that, very famous kind of quirky commercial. All of these have different moods and genres that without the music, the commercial loses a ton of its feel. So as Vivian's going through this, she's looking at some of these for inspiration, maybe working with her team, trying to figure out exactly, what would hit home for her particular needs. This is part of the kind of inspiration, creative process, right? But it's also learning like, you're kind of repeating what's been done before. And if you see certain music works better in a certain context, that may perform better for your own ad. So she's taking some clues here. But when she starts going through this, she realizes, well, I've got to get music somehow. So she lands on something. And for the sake of this argument, we're going to say that she's going with a pop song, right? She wants to do more of an upbeat, kind of inspiring commercial that's a little more, think of an Apple commercial where people are putting iPod headphones or AirPods in their ears and, they're kind of jamming out, etc. So she decides to go with a new pop song that is airing right now. It's I think it's Levitated. You'll see it in a second here, but it's by Dua Lipa. That's the one I used for this example. And she's like, all right, I want to get clearance on this. She starts doing a little research. And again, Mike's going to go into more specifics in a second. But for the sake of Vivian here, she's doing some research. She realizes that she has to get clearance on two parts of the song. One is the master or sound recording. This is essentially what you hear. And this is, a recording. You can have multiple people that have different sound recordings of the same song. So if you've ever heard a cover song, that is a new sound recording, but of the same composition or song. And so where this gets complicated is the original composition or song writer or the owner of the publishing there, you have to get clearance on the publishing side, which again is the song or the composition. That'd be like the lyrics, the actual arrangement of the song as far as the lyrics and composition go. And then the master and sound recording side, you have to get clearance from that as well. So in the case of Dua Lipa's, that would be her record label, right? And then publishers would be any of the publishers that are associated with the song. So first she starts doing some digging. She looks up, all right, Warner is the record label, found this on Wikipedia. There's a bunch of songwriters here, but that doesn't necessarily tell me much about the publishing, right? And I need to get clearance on the publishing. So she keeps doing some digging. What she does realize is that this song has 2 copyright lawsuits on it. So what, she had started figuring out like, hey, maybe we could use this song. I'll contact Warner. But then she's like, I'm feeling a little cold feet here. This song's got a copyright lawsuit for infringing on another. And as she starts Googling this and, she's like, well, does that really matter to me? She Googles and she learns that, yeah, if you're using a song that is infringing on another copyright, she may have to pull that ad down later. She doesn't want that to happen. So then she's like, all right, maybe this isn't the song I want to use. She kind of goes back to the drawing board, tries to learn a little bit more about this. And she hadn't even gotten to the step where she looks up the publishers on this, right? That's a whole other side. But ultimately she realizes this is a complicated process. Like, what am I getting myself into here? And we know that this ad is going to be used in a ton of different areas. The company may not know exactly where it's going to air yet. They might want to test it on Facebook, right? They might want to see, okay, whenever we get this ad done, we want to put it out on Facebook. It may even become a YouTube ad, or maybe maybe they want to use it as just an actual YouTube video. So rather than, an ad that plays on a YouTube video, this might want to be its own video. That can wind up being a separate type of licensing, because that usage for a YouTube video is different than usage for an ad placed on a YouTube video. You can see where this gets really complicated. So she starts, trying to figure out, well, I don't really know where this is going to be used. Help. I have no idea. There's all these things. I got to get clearance from publishers that I don't know how to get in contact with. I haven't even been able to find out who the publishers are. I know that I'm supposed to get clearance from them. I found the record label, but there's so many aspects to this. Why is this so complicated? And ultimately, it's because copyright laws are old and they are complicated. The reason that the last time any major updates happened to the music copyright law that we're familiar with today, and that kind of makes up the foundation of this complexity and these hoops that you have to jump through, there is good reason for a lot of this, but they haven't really been updated since 1976. And this is again, a very complex topic, but we want to try to break down some of the aspects here to explain the complexity. And then once we get through some of this, I'm going to show you ways in different professions and for different use cases, how you can go about clearing music and some of the options available to you. But for now, for these copyright laws, I'm going to hand it over to Mike for him to explain a little bit more about how this works under the hood and on paper.
Thanks, Trevor. So what's important to note is that copyright law gives copyright owners 5 exclusive rights. The right to reproduce the work. So to reproduce, in this case, the underlying composition or the sound recording. The right to create derivative works based on the copyrighted work. So in this case would be to make a video containing the composition or sound recording, to distribute copies of the work, to perform the work, or to display the work. So if you want to display lyrics in your video, for example, you would need to obtain permission to do that from the publisher. So Vivian would have had to get clearance and licenses around the project to be able to use the song and the sound recording in her video, to be able to reproduce the composition and the sound recording for use in that video, to distribute it and to perform it. She would need to contact all the rights holders who would additionally like to most likely want to see the project and approve how the copyright is being used and price accordingly. If the rights holders see your video and do not believe they would want that song associated with it, they could deny it altogether. Or if they...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to say too, this happens a lot with things like, and Mike, you might have some examples to add here, but like, for instance, if it's political content, some artists may or may not want to associate with that. If it is content that's for a particular demographic, or if the video is, for instance, more of a satire or even a parody, or well, there's laws around parody too. That's even more complex. But if it's a video where the content, the artist wants to protect their brand in many cases. So they want to be really clear about what they allow the use for and what they don't. And because there's multiple rights holders, they may have different opinions on that.
Sure. And in addition, the rights holders would need to approve and price based on exactly which territories the project would be used and distributed in. For example, just the US and Canada, or if you want to distribute worldwide or just in the UK, etc. The rights holders would need to approve and price based on what mediums the project would be used and distributed through. Whether that is online only, or commercial broadcast, or theatrical. The rights holders would also need to approve and price based on term. So how long you're able to use the song and recording in your project. For example, there might be an initial 2-year term on a license before you need to go back and obtain additional licenses from all of the rights holders as well.
And part of the reason that this one happens, I'll give you a practical example, would be going back to my earlier reference to like an Apple commercial, right? If an artist issues a license for a commercial usage like that, a lot of times Apple may want exclusive access to it. So they'll pay up for that, right? They'll pay a lot more for, like, we want to be the only commercial with this song on it right now. But the rights holder doesn't want to give them permanent access to that to use it forever. So they're going to put a term on it. And so, a lot of times you can, at the end of the term, you can renegotiate and extend it or whatever. But ultimately, they want to have a little flexibility to where if they have another offer come along, let's say in 2 years, Coca-Cola wants to use this song, or even in 20 years, if it becomes a legacy song like classic rock and things are now, they may want to use it for a different flavor in their ad. But if it's been, if the rights are exclusive to another ad for that period of time, it causes issues. So this actually comes up a lot as well.
In addition to that, let's say it is a non-exclusive license, which means that not only your video can use the song, but in others as well. Let's say your product is making a ton of money from the song being used in the commercial and generating a lot of revenue. The publishers might come to you at the end of the 2 years and demand a lot more money as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And so going back to this Dua Lipa song, the first thing you would need to do is to search all of the rights holders, and which are the publishers in this case, through in the US, the ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC repertoire. So on this Dua Lipa song, you have all the following publishers that need to be licensed from: Baby Jesus Publishing, Best Coffee in Town, EMI Music Publishing, Italians Do It Better, Yakking Music, Prescription Songs, South Coast Music Group LLC, Tap Music Publishing Limited, Universal Music Corporation, and Unsub Pub LLC. Those are all the rights holders that you would need to obtain permission from and clear all of those licenses and deal points from, and that's just on the composition. To obtain rights to use the sound recording. In addition, you would need to obtain a license for all of the rights you would need through Warner Records as well.
And these publishing entities, the other thing that gets difficult about this is if you're going to go negotiate a license, again, they may have different ideas of what is appropriate usage for this, what the right price is. And you have to get everyone to agree on this before the license is solidified. Is that right, Mike?
Yes, and usually there's a most favored nations clause involved as well, which essentially means whatever publisher's charging the most, all the other publishers want that as well. So you very easily could be pushing your budget limits with the amount of publishers such as this composition.
And what is such a pain from the creator side with this, not the artist creator, but the actual person who's trying to use this in a production or a project, is because due to even the complexity on the publisher side, for instance, if I'm a publisher and I'm representing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of copyrights, it may not make sense for me to negotiate with every potential deal that comes across the table, because I know that in many cases, there's not a consensus to be had. Or if, let's say how many, there's probably 10 publishers here. If one of them wants more than this buyer is willing to pay for, the whole thing falls apart. And then everyone's time was wasted if they had already been going through negotiations with some of the others. So what can happen is, as a creator, I may reach out to 1, 2, 3, 4 of these publishing companies, and there may be one that never gets back to me, or there may be a couple that you may not get a hold of any of them. So what happens is it doesn't make sense for some of these people to even pick up the phone, because it's not worth their time unless the potential budget for the deal is over a certain amount. And again, for like indie projects or anything that isn't the next like blockbuster film, it can make it really difficult to get the music you need. And that's even more exacerbated with the volume of content that's coming out now, right? If you're doing a social media video, like on YouTube, or for instance, is a good example. They have kind of their own proprietary rights management system, but getting clearance on something like this for a YouTube video can be potentially cumbersome. So as we kind of go forward, thanks a lot for that, Mike. And I think that, as we get near the end here, in a bit, we'll be able to do some Q&A, talk a little bit more, because licensing is very complex. I've been in this business for a little over 6 years now. And before that, I was a professional touring and session musician. So I've been on both sides of this equation, on the rights holder side as a label/publishing company, and on the artist side as an actual creator songwriter. And there are, it is definitely one of those that has to be viewed through a holistic lens. So there's reasons that a lot of this are in place, but it does make things a little difficult. So there's some solutions here on the creator side. First, we're going to take a top-down approach here. So like the highest budget productions typically are like film and TV or streaming productions. And the biggest budget of these would be, these would be movies that are, could be Netflix's newest film, or like blockbuster releases in theaters, et cetera, which there are becoming less and less of those. But ultimately, these are movies that have a budget for a music supervisor. And this is a best case scenario for a creator, because if they have a music supervisor, they're handling a lot of this for them. They may work with the music supervisor on the right, they may have ideas around the scoring that they want, or the vibe, or whatever, or the music supervisor maybe someone who is versed in this themselves. They may be very creative and are actually helping to score out the movie through their creative vision. So either way, big budget productions typically rely on, I'm sorry, I put movie supervisor, I meant music supervisor. They typically rely on a music supervisor and or a combo of licensing songs like the Dua Lipa one and custom score. So the recent, I actually read about this, but the recent Batman movie that came out had a groundbreaking score for a number of reasons. One, it was very interesting the way that they scored that movie. It had some repetitive notes that repeated, pretty much underscoring the entire movie. There was like a sound bed that was kind of pulsing the whole time. And the music they used built on top of that. A lot of them were in similar keys, right? So they wanted this theme to be kind of pertinent throughout the film. But the other cool thing about it is they even had they had recordings in there that they had gone to labels and rights holders and found old tape recordings. I can't remember the artist off the top of my head, but they had found old tape recordings from the 50s that were never released anywhere. They weren't put out on any cassettes of any kind, nothing. And they got the license to basically use those for this movie, even though they never had an official release. So there's some really interesting stuff that can happen here, but it does take a lot of work, a lot of creativity, and you are having to deal with outside parties, not just yourself. So another example for the film and TV streaming side are low budget productions. These could be indie films, things you see come through like Sundance Film Festival, and not all are extremely low budget. It's not like they're, some are, but it's not like everyone's shooting in their backyard with a camcorder, right? Like there are indie movies, even ones that do well at Sundance, that have such low budgets that they shoot on iPhones and things like that. That happens. So given the budget constraints, they don't have the ability or the time to go deal with a lot of what we've been talking about. So they might leverage stock music. And stock music, again, that's what our business deals with. But there's a couple options you have when it comes to this, and it makes things like that easier. When you're budget conscious, your time and resource restrained, there are other options than custom scoring with a composer or licensing or both. So business productions, I consider this like a step down in terms of budget typically. These would be like ads that a company is running, or internal or training videos. So ads, this could be everything from a tire shop down the road that's doing a commercial locally, all the way to large corporate companies like we were talking about earlier with Apple or Coca-Cola, things like that. Typically they'll get stock music if their budget is constrained. So that would be, the local companies, or if they're just resource constrained. They might not have a ton of creative talent on staff that has bandwidth for this. So they use stock music to help there. Also, there's pre-cleared music. So instead of having to go get licenses yourself, if you are issuing ads on certain platforms, some of these, like TikTok, has just recently started working on a commercial library that's built into the platform where they partner with companies like ourselves that pre-clear music for you to use in there. And it's just kind of the complexity of the licensing is taken away from you because the platform cuts it on your behalf, cuts the deal. Now for internal and training videos, these are primarily stock music because again, the only people who are typically seeing these are employees. But when you're a large company like a Microsoft, for instance, and you've got thousands of employees that are seeing these videos, you have to license that music the same way anyone who's distributing those publicly would, primarily due to how many eyeballs are on it, but also because your liability is bigger when you're that large of a company. So you just have to have your bases covered. Now, one more kind of like step down in terms of a budget or at least ability to afford custom scoring and things are wedding videos. There are some very high dollar, like celebrity wedding video creators that will work with musicians and composers that will custom score. But primarily, these individuals are using stock music or at least music that they can license on a less expensive basis due to the fact that their wedding video isn't getting mass public release like a film or TV production would. These are the other thing that's nice here with stock music is you typically, you might need a sound bed, which is very different than like music for an ad, which can be like corporate ukulele type sounding stuff. If you're working with music beds, you need music that is scored to be long and have builds and very particular emotion and dynamics throughout the song. And stock library production music is typically created for that in order to enable you to use music that is, can evoke the emotions that you're trying to get and also allow you to have, music that is composed with builds built in to where it actually fleshes out, for instance, if you're in a wedding video and you're at the beginning, they might have like drone footage of a field, right? And there might be some serene music kind of coming in underneath. As it goes on, instruments might be added. There might be builds up until they kiss maybe, and then they go to the reception music, which is typically like dance songs and things like that. Some stock and library music can be composed to actually help with scoring that. And then one more rung down on the ladder. This is, we're all intimately familiar with, to a different degree, with what's going on in social media. There's a billion different apps now. They all kind of have their own interfaces. If you've ever messed with uploading your own videos to these, you'll notice that some have music libraries, some don't. Some have, different music libraries than others because they've cleared different songs for it. Some will or will not let you use music for commercial uses. Like I said, some of these companies are getting into, TikTok mainly, getting into trying to figure out partnerships on their customers' behalf to solve this problem. But it does depend on the usage in the platform. So typically you're not going to go get clearance for some new pop song for your social media video. It's just it's either going to be too expensive, or no one's going to pick up the phone, or any other reason from before that you could think of. Now, this type of music can be licensed directly, though. So I did mention that some of these platforms do cut their own deals. That doesn't mean you can't use music that you license yourself. It just means that you're not able to piggyback off of the work that the platform has done for you from the licensing standpoint. And if you're not using stock music, you might have to go through what our friend Vivian did earlier, which is not an enjoyable process. Now, the furthest down on the ladder, these are people who are hobbyists. They might be getting into being a creator. They might be, it might be mom taking a video of her kids in the backyard, but she wants to post it in places. Typically, stock music is great for this if you're trying to make a little, kind of up your game in the production side, but you're still a hobbyist. It can be definitely affordable enough to do this on a hobby basis. But some kind of hobbyist editing tools, even like iMovie, for instance, on your Mac, have little music libraries built in. They're not very expansive. Typically, the music quality is much lower than you would find in more high quality production libraries like ours. But this does exist, and it allows you, at least an avenue to find music for your projects. Also, if it's not commercial use and it's truly hobby, and your goal is not to ever monetize your videos, you typically don't have to worry about it, and you can just use whatever music they'll let you use. That being said, there's some risks with this in certain instances. For instance, on YouTube. So I mentioned that YouTube has their own rights management system. Well, if you upload a video that you've created and it has music in it, YouTube has an automated algorithm called Content ID that is basically artificial intelligence that goes through your video and determines if it can find any copyrighted music in there. And what'll happen is you'll get a little flag that says, hey, this is copyrighted. Typically, the worst that'll happen is they will say, you can't ever monetize this video because the rights holder has claimed monetization on this, which basically means if you use, for instance, like let's say I had music that I had set up in this way on YouTube. If you were to go use my music, you would get this claim, and it basically means if your video generates any ad dollars, that money's going to me. So if you ever get big enough on YouTube to where you can collect your own ad revenue, this is called YouTube's partner program. You don't have that option on videos where the revenue is directed to the copyright holder for the music. So if your goal is to blow up and become a YouTuber and whatever else, you don't want that burden when, you spend a year or two growing your channel and you've got tons of videos on there. Then when you're actually able to monetize all the videos that have all these views before, if they're not cleared in a way that like a company like ours provides, that money is all going to go to the music rights holder, because YouTube doesn't split the ad revenue with the video creator and the rights holder as of today. They give it to one or the other. So it's either your money goes to the music rights holder, or it goes to you if you're eligible for the YouTube partner program. Now, where the risk comes in, I mentioned that most of the time you don't have any risk, but YouTube's a different situation. There are some rights holders that fully block their content on YouTube, and there's no real way to know that until you upload a video. So what can happen is if you upload a video with a song that has been noted by the copyright holder to be blocked on YouTube, then if you do that 3 times, YouTube will shut down your channel for good. And there's not really a recourse you can take to get it back. So it's a risk that many creators, especially if they're ever trying to monetize their channel, are not willing to take. They want to know from the get-go that the music they're using is cleared, safe. Even if they can't monetize on it, they at least want to know if it's going to be blocked or not. So I just went through a whole bunch of stuff, and Mike gave a bunch of details around, the ins and outs of licensing, why copyright law is so complicated. It's because it's split into a few different parts, the master and the composition side or publishing. And then, some ways that you can use it based on what your needs are, what your profession is. I think at this point, though, it would be awesome to open it up for some Q&A if there's any questions. I know there's only a few of us here today, but this is a really complicated topic, and it continues to evolve as new platforms pop up. So if there's any specific questions you have, or maybe want to dive deeper on any of these, particular platforms or whatever, happy to do it.
Hey, Trevor, this is Robert. Just a question about some of the, more popular or, more widely distributed songs. Is there any effort or attempt to provide a one-stop shop for licensing for the downstream market so that they can have a more easier or affordable access to some of those things in a legal manner?
It has started. There are a couple platforms that have tried this in the past and never been able to do it. One had made a little bit of a stride that we had a relationship with. Their name was originally Song Freedom, and then they changed it to, Firefly, I believe. But they had cut deals with record labels and publishers to where if you were doing wedding videos in particular, you could they had some pre-cleared, well, I'll say pre-cleared, they had licensable pop music, so like Rihanna songs and stuff like that were only for wedding video use, but labels would not allow them to do that for any other use, because again, they got to protect the brand. And part of the issue is that when you run into there's so much value packed into maintaining the brand on these songs that labels, other publishers, etc. We have labels or relationships with all of the major labels, and we've heard the same thing time and time again, that they want to be involved in this space, but they're not set up to handle the volume of it. So there's another company called Lickd, Lickd. I actually forgot to put them on here in the stock music side. They're kind of in between all this, where they're like they are, you pay for each use, where if you're like, I want this song, you're going to pay for that song for that video. So you have to pay every time you use it for any particular song. But it is a platform that has worked out deals with some labels where you can find popular music, and I think it's YouTube only right now. You can pay to use that content on YouTube. However, even with they have a massive catalog. I think it's a couple million songs. None of them even have the option to negotiate or anything if your video is to be used for branded or sponsored ad content or anything that's commercial, really. So even that is more so about if it's a non-monetized or non-branded video that's being posted, you can get it cleared. But based on my experience and everything we're still hearing, labels are very, they're not interested in dabbling in this stuff where even though the scale is there, they feel like they need to have more control over individual uses to protect the brands of the individual artists. So doing millions of videos where they don't have the manpower bandwidth to vet content in all of them typically doesn't interest them. And they're, this is in my opinion, it's a little bit of outdated thinking, but they're afraid of missing out on revenue. We believe that there's volume on that side that will make up for that. But it is a matter of, the labels have to be willing to kind of play ball there. And to date, there's a little hesitancy for sure.
Todd makes a great comment on the chat about fair use. Todd, if you're able to use your mic, could you comment on that a little bit? And maybe that's a good thing to discuss.
Yeah, hi everybody. I teach interactive media. I've got a course called Interactive Media Applications, where the students produce a variety of different media, some of it video and podcasting kind of thing, especially around the video. And you can kind of read the comment. I advise them that they can use pretty much whatever they want in the music world under fair use if it's for an educational project. But pretty much as soon as they graduate, that use changes to a business use because it's being used to promote themselves. Right? Basically,
That
sell
is a great
themselves
question.
to an employer. So
Yeah, that
am
I believe
on
you're
point
correct.
there or what?
I believe you're correct. Mike, I'll let you chime in on that.
Yeah, so fair use can only be determined by the court. But you are correct in that if something is being used for educational purposes in a classroom, it's pretty much guaranteed that it will win in the court of fair use, but you actually can't receive a true fair use ruling unless it does go to the courts. So it's always best practice to license whenever you can. But you are correct. Once they graduate and they do leave the classroom, that fair use won't hold up.
Yeah, I do mention to them that fair use is a set of guidelines and not any rule or regulation or anything that they need to watch out for it.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a it's intended to provide benefit to people, but because it's so gray, it gives people anxiety sometimes for sure, and I can understand that.
I think another thing that's interesting is a lot of the licensing business models that you're seeing with I don't want to say professional, that's a bad terminology, but popular music or popular sounds that are in radio or pop music. A lot of that licensing is based on the historically broadcast over the air or movie distribution systems, right? And so now you look at something like a local commercial for a local company's Facebook page, and they want to get a license on something. They may only get 100,000 views on that Facebook page, but as we've seen, something goes viral for one reason or another, and it becomes a 100 million thing. And so I can see where some of these social media outlets and other areas where people are producing high quality, very good video is now approaching, the type of eyeballs or ears that, you would see in local media or even national over the air media.
That's exactly right. And this is evolving almost on a weekly, monthly basis. Like there was even stuff towards the end of last year, where the platforms, like I mentioned with TikTok, are trying to find ways to, help on the creator side here because they don't want to stifle creation. And that's not what copyright laws weren't intended to stifle creation. It is a byproduct sometimes though, because it can make it really difficult due to the obstacles we discussed here. But and Corey, I just saw your question on here too. He asked if Soundstripe is working on any legislation efforts to update kind of antiquated laws. We have not, but part of this is because, I think we would definitely be interested in being part of the discussion when that would happen. But I think a lot of the a lot of the platforms, TikToks, Facebooks, YouTubes, they're going to be the ones that are first at the table, primarily because they have the most number of eyeballs. They're the most affected by the areas where copyright law is antiquated. And they're going to be the ones that the labels are willing to sit down with and have this discussion, and potentially with legislative bodies too. That said, they also have the resources, the bandwidth, and the funding to be able to go, essentially lobby for, or at least like fight for their side of changing these copyright laws. And should those conversations, they're always happening, but to the degree where we were able to be involved with them, I absolutely think we would, given the ability and the bandwidth, we would absolutely want to be involved in that. Mike, I know you're more familiar with the landscape itself. I don't know, if there are avenues for that already exist that we haven't tapped into, or kind of how that works, how these things wind up changing over time.
Yeah, so something that we didn't mention was that there was a recent overhaul of the copyright law called the Music Modernization Act.
Yeah.
But that wasn't specifically to make using music easier for video content creators. Part of that actually was to develop a government body to where publishers could get more accurately paid for their works. So there's a lot of update to copyright law as of recent to better streamline the payment processes for music copyright holders. But there haven't been anything as of recent to make video production any easier for production companies.
Has there been a noticeable change in the structure in which a piece of music is created? You know, with the democratization of technology and other things, are we seeing more music being produced by a single copyright holder versus the large collaborative efforts that have been historic in the past?
It's actually, it's kind of gone the other way, which is crazy. So yeah, I mean, yes, you do have a lot of independent songwriters and such that are making their own stuff, but like that Dua Lipa song had like 7 or 8 co-writers on it, right? So like even just the writing of the composition had more bodies involved than was typical even a decade ago. That said, there's also like, you know, as content continues to change, there are new ways, and this is kind of maybe tangential to the question you asked, but I do think it's interesting and pertinent, is that when referring to TikTok again, they kind of the way the platform works, what we know of as a recorded music and released music that copyright was set up for really is kind of changing. So when someone goes on TikTok, for instance, and they are, let's say they've got an idea for a chorus of a song. I know of a couple artists that are doing this, where they'll go on TikTok, they'll sing a few bars from this idea they have, and if it gets a bunch of views, they'll then go flesh out that song, or maybe come up with the second verse or something, and then do that. See, they'll basically use reactions on TikTok as their creative feedback loop, almost like an agile process in a product company. It's really interesting. And then they'll go fully flesh out the song and release it to Spotify or whatever. Where this gets tricky is, should their original, when they first did that first TikTok with a few lines of a chorus or whatever, is that enough music to be considered its own recording? It's on TikTok and it's synced to a video. Did they release a song and release a video that they synced to their own song, or are those separate things? Also, if someone repurposes their TikTok for something else, do they have copyright ownership over the song itself? Like these are all very new problems that we didn't really have before, that there's no real precedence for. So there's a lot. It's not just on how music's being made. That is evolving. Like I said, there's more parties being involved. But it's also like how the actual creative process is done is evolving with these platforms. It's very, very wild.
What does make it more complex now too with technology and social media is historically you wouldn't have a publisher and composer in South Korea collaborating with a publisher and composer in the US on a given composition. With social media and technology evolving, different publishers from all different territories can collaborate on the same composition, which makes licensing a lot more complex, because in each territory, there's different sets of copyright laws.
Yeah, and that's a whole cluster in itself too, international territories and how the US copyright law differs from basically anywhere overseas and vice versa. Corey, you had a good question too on AI created music and how that'll integrate. So years ago, even when we started Soundstripe, there were a couple solutions that were popping up. One of the earliest ones is called JukeDeck, JukeDeck. TikTok actually bought them 3 or 4 years ago. They are AI created music. There's a couple others. One's called Amper Music that was bought by Shutterstock, I believe. And some of these are pretty good at some of the more repetitive, less artsy forms of music. I use that lightly, but really when I say that, I mean like corporate ukulele pop, right? I referenced that earlier too. That is like got a very specific sound. I mean, think of like corporate commercials, like male enhancement commercials actually use a lot of this stuff, the like ukulele stuff. That can be done pretty well with AI. But where this gets tricky is like the more artsy genres like indie or folk, etc., or especially types of music where the person's voice is a big part of it. I mean, like obviously most artists, especially those that are vocal music, are known by the timbre of a singer's voice, etc. But there's some that are so far out there that like Tom Waits, for example. I mean, he's the most identifiable voice on the planet, right? Like we haven't gotten to the point where like AI can generate new sounds. Like let's say an AI could come up with its own vocal timbre. That is theoretically possible, but we haven't gotten to a point where I've seen any AI do any kind of like the creative process like a human, right? Like cloning, it can do really well. We've all seen deep fake stuff, right? A video where someone is essentially, their words or their face and everything they're saying is changed to sound like they said something different. The more that progresses, the more this stuff becomes possible. But I don't think yet there's a very narrow band of types of sound beds and music that AI is pretty efficient at. That said, 5-6 years ago, it wasn't even good at that. So like at some point, there is a future where AI has a bigger part in all this. But I don't believe that, like as humans, we are creative. We have our own innate soul, like that goes into our music and our art and such. I don't think that'll ever go away. But for more utilitarian music, stuff that's used for, very particular use cases, there are instances, again, sound beds, kind of more like orchestral, inspiring type stuff, where AI could become more of a player in that scene.
I will note too, since we're on the topic, that it was ruled in 2019 that AI music cannot be copyrighted in the US.
Interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, interesting. So there is no ownership basis. Even the AI platform can't claim ownership of something that its AI engine created?
Correct.
Wow.
Does it become public domain, Mike, or how does it work?
There's just it can't be copyrighted. So no one has the exclusive rights.
That's going to get interesting when we look at things like AI generated images for film, which is going to be.
Or even, I mean, what about AI generated IP, right? Like even software that's constructed, like that's happening now already. I mean, you could think about like businesses build their backs on patents a lot of times in different industries, but what happens if an AI generates that technology? It can't be patented by that logic. So that's a can of worms. That's interesting.
That is. We're all familiar with the term work for hire. And usually when you sign a work for hire contract, it means you have given up any and all of your rights to your product to that person who is paying you for that work for hire contract. I'm curious if some of these collaborative platforms where you might be producing something or creating something, sharing it and getting feedback on it, like you were talking about with the songwriter earlier, Trevor, I wonder if some of those have in their terms and conditions that you are, as a participant in that platform, giving up any of your ownership of what you put on that platform. The whole work for hire thing has always been, a very big gotcha. There's plenty of session musicians who walk in and basically walk out with a check and that's all they get, right? They don't necessarily get anything else behind that, depending on, what they're doing and where they're doing it.
Yeah, this is an interesting one too, because there's, you have cases of like Motown, for instance, right? Like a lot of those guys like never saw anything from what they were a part of. And then you have more like even companies in our space. So we actually work on the way we do it is we have a work for hire system where we do a kickback on the performance rights. So like we buy the music and we do that because we're a stock library, right? Like we're creating stuff that people can use, production music. but we still share in the copyright royalties that come from music performances. Remember, Mike was talking about the 5 different types of rights. Performances are a federally regulated royalty. So that royalty we actually split with our songwriters, where they get the songwriter share of the publishing, we get the publisher share. And but this continues to evolve too, right? Like even with streaming platforms popped up, like one of our competitors now, they're also doing work for hire stuff, but they split in the streaming royalties. So like there's new models kind of being popped up, and I think they're all trying to solve, like, there's a business need, right? Like in our case, we need to own the music because we're doing mass clearances of content and all this stuff, but we want to be fair to the artists. We were artists first and foremost. I still am an artist. You know, we've come from that world, been familiar with it, all been signed to record deals, and we've seen good and bad there. So we've tried to figure out, like, is there a way to, like, kind of have your cake and eat it too, where everybody's winning? And it is a tough thing as the market evolves, because even with the current ways to make money in royalties, there's still tons of debate happening. Look at all the Spotify rhetoric right now. You know, like, is the royalty enough? Is it even worth, you know, what you could make on Spotify? Is it even worth releasing music over there? And like, everyone has a different opinion on these types of things, but the bottom line is too, is that some of this, you know, as Mike was, I think Mike mentioned this earlier, but the Music Modernization Act, there's also been a lot of talk around trying to get songwriter checks up for a lot of the reason that you're talking about, Robert, where these platforms that are issuing royalties, many times the master side, the record label, is making a lot more than the composition side, which is the songwriter. So, and that's because the publishing side, the songwriter side, is federally regulated because it was set up to handle broadcast terrestrial radio, which was, you know, they were trying to solve a huge problem at once. So they federally regulated publishing royalties, but then they let the master side, the sound recording side, be private market negotiated. So you've got labels that are making better royalty rates than the publishing rates on Spotify. So it's a very complex system. I don't know if there's a right answer, but you're exactly right. There are definitely situations where, you know, and work for hire too is, at least I believe this because our business does it. It's really important, the transparency on that side. Like that's where you saw where a lot of guys early on, Motown again being a good example, just were, you know, people can get into situations that they're not fully understanding, right. And that's where this gets super hairy. But it is more complicated because of the fact that some of the royalties are federally regulated, some are on the private market, and it makes the equitability a little confusing.
So a couple minutes left. Any final comments, Mike or Trevor? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel here that's going to make this simpler? Well,
I would love to hear Mike's opinion on this too, but I think that this is a constantly moving target because even the mediums that we use content on are constantly new and evolving. That said, I've been in some panels even where there's been some really rock solid discussion around ways to kind of future proof, because TikTok is not the last new medium that's going to pop up and shake things up. This is going to keep happening. And we can't always predict what that looks like, but the two ways to solve that are create something that's truly future proof, which is hard to do when you don't know, like, you know, when there's unknown unknowns, or find a way to where it's easier to adjust these laws over time. Because right now, copyright law just it's behind by 10, 15 years on everything, every time something shifts. So that's my opinion. Mike, I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, so copyright law, I don't see it ever changing from where you need to obtain permission from the publisher and label to pair the composition and sound recording to your video. But what I do see evolving is like kind of what Andrew Smith said here in the chat box, of a lot of these video distribution platforms, for example, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, are going to be developing. YouTube has the most robust platform for being able to for the platforms to being able to license directly from the labels and publishers, to where the music will be available for the video production companies to use music, and the platform handles all of the licensing on your behalf. Another thing that is happening a lot are catalog acquisitions, to where a investor will buy up someone's entire catalog, and then that will change, 8 copyright owners on the composition to 1 copyright owner on the composition. So as more catalog acquisitions happen, that will streamline things as well, especially for when you're not just using on social media, but you need it more for like commercial film, TV productions.
And the last thing I'll say there too is where this gets complicated in a different way is when you have rights holders who pass away, or like Mike said, where it gets sold to other people. Keeping up with all this data is huge, and creating a platform like what you're talking about, Andrew, like finding a way to really serve creators with all the music that's out there in a way that just allows them to, whether it's for a fee or whatever, use it however they want and it get out there without all this permission and stuff. It's a really hard problem to solve because there's so many parties involved. Again, sometimes there's rights that are handled, owned, managed by people who are mismanaging them or not even, not managing them at all. It's a tough problem to solve for sure.
That's great. Hey, great discussion, everybody. I really appreciate all the questions from all the participants. And this has been recorded, so we're going to start a YouTube channel with some of these. So I hope everybody's okay with that. I guess I need to maybe get rights for everybody to put this on YouTube.
No music, so we'll be good on that side. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody sing or whistle right now, please. But as we get ready for our next meeting in about 3 months, I'm just ask everybody to reach out to your peers and friends and cohorts in the media technology world and let them know what we are doing here. And let's continue trying to build this team in this group. There's lots of knowledge out there, like Trevor and Mike have shared with us today. Lots of things that many of us want to hear about and know about. I think there's great advantage to having these peer group meetings where we can share our experiences and knowledge and help each other out with our careers and our technical skills. So thanks, everybody. And I will stay in communication with you guys through Slack and email. So thanks. Glad to see everybody. Yep.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.